Hello everyone, my name is Zehra Kaya. I am from State University of New York at Buffalo in their counseling psychology PhD program. I recently defended my dissertation. The topic that I will be discussing today is part of my dissertation. So I will be sharing my screen, but I think you will not be able to see me anymore. So I couldn't figure out how to just be seen and share at the same time. So I will be discussing perceived religious discrimination among Muslim Americans in the Trump era and applying these results to case conceptualization, case formulation, within social justice framework. So a little bit of overview. So I will give some introduction, some background about the problem, about the research, and I will give methods, which methods that I have used, and I will talk about results, and I will be actually discussing the implication that I concluded from the results. So, importance of the study, why this study is important. So Islamophobia or anti-Muslim attitudes had been rapidly increasing in the United States in recent years, and especially Muslim Americans have often been victims of religious discrimination and hate crimes during the Trump era. Especially based on mental health, physical health, and employment rate and income levels actually were negatively impacted by those. As a result of these discrimination. So in the current socio-political climate, so this intensified anti-Muslim rhetoric also has placed Muslim Americans at a really heightened risk for the religious discrimination. So in 2016, according to FBI reports, there were 127 reported victims of hate crimes compared with 91 the year before and then 93 in 2001, which was post, which actually suppressed even the levels of post 9/11, and definitely they have negative effect on Muslim Americans' well-being. So according to other source of centers who are collecting data for the hate crimes toward Muslim Americans, they even actually reported higher increased in those actually Muslim American hatred and hate crimes. So according to the Council on American Islamic Relations, there are actually 44% increased. And according to California State University, hate crime reports, there are actually 78% increase during this Trump era. And I started the Trump era that 2015, June 15, and it is actually accompanied with Trump's. It started with the Trump's presidential election campaign. So, but the FBI reports only actually showed there is 30 something percentage increase, which is highly underreported. So definitely overall being a Muslim Americans within the current political discourse has unique implications, and that requires research in order to fully understand the effect that living in the age of Trump has on the Muslim Americans. So purpose of the study. So this study aimed to reveal if Trump era has an impact on discrimination on Muslim Americans. So, and it is essential to informing mental health providers about culturally relevant and meaningful delivery of mental health services to their Muslim clients. And the research question that I have asked to conduct this study was like, are there any differences between Muslim Americans perceive religious discrimination before and after the Trump era? So in terms of the theoretical framework, I have actually like used, recently like three psychologists, Dr. Awad, Kia Keating, and Emir in 2019, developed a model which is called like cumulative racial and ethnic trauma for especially like EMENA population. So since Muslim Americans, majority of Muslim Americans actually are fitting under the like EMENA population, and this framework actually is like adapted from Bronfenbrenner, based on their ecological model. So like it says actually like discrimination factors are actually like it has like two levels. One is like micro, it's more individual, like it require like interpersonal discrimination, some identity recognition, and it actually like the outcome, it actually like ended up just creating some kind of fear, hopelessness, alienation in individual level, and also create some kind of physical and mental health conditions. And in the macro level, there are actually like three components so that we need to consider when we are talking about like those kind of like impact on Muslim Americans, like mental health and general well-being. Uh, they were actually historical trauma, national context, and institutional discrimination. So those like institutional discrimination creates some restriction, and like alienation, and definitely disadvantages like as an outcome. So I used this theoretical framework when I was actually like concluding some clinical implication for from the results. So in the methods section, so I will be discussing some inclusion and exclusion criteria. So participants, like who are the participants? My participants who were actually specifically identify themselves as Muslim American. So they were able to communicate in English. So I excluded who cannot communicate in English. And also they currently live in the United States, and they have lived in the United States for at least 5 years in order to compare their experience before and after the Trump era. And they were like 18 years and older. So as I mentioned earlier, this study is part of my dissertation. So I have additional research questions, and like when I run the power analysis, and it revealed like 1 for the 7 participants are minimally required. So there were like 302 Muslim Americans recruited for the study. But due to missing data, only 198 participants were analyzed for this specific research question. So when we are looking at the demographics, majority of my participants were female, like almost 73%. So they are like highly educated. It needs to be like mentioned. I think almost like 60% of my participants actually like had like graduate degrees, and only actually like 6% actually like had lower than college degrees. And employment status is also higher compared to like Pew Research American Muslim data. So it is like 77 of the participants are employed. And also like 80% of the participants have actually United States citizenship. And interestingly, like when they were asked if they have had any like discrimination incident or like hate crime incident during the Trump era, like more than half of the participants said yes. And almost 50% of the like participants actually were white, and 40% were actually like Asian and Pacific Islander, and specifically South Asian. And unfortunately, Black Americans, African Americans, Hispanic, and Latinx Americans actually were underrepresented in my research. So, what are the results? I actually ask specifically this question to found any results. So I think the research question was, are there any differences between Muslim Americans perceived as discrimination before and after the Trump era? So there was a Likert scale which was actually there was a Likert scale from 1 to 10, and that question actually asked the participants if they have experienced anti-Muslim discrimination during, anti-Muslim discrimination, perceived as discrimination during this era, and they were given that scale twice. And after some preliminary tests, so a paired sample t-test was conducted to explore the research question. So there was actually significant difference in the perceived discrimination scores before and after the Trump era, t-test scores actually revealed. But these results suggest that the Trump era has affected the perceived discrimination among Muslim Americans, and specifically results says that Muslim Americans perceived discrimination increased after the Trump era. So what does it mean? So it definitely showed there is a significant increase in perceived discrimination during the Trump era, and it actually demonstrated as negative effect on the Muslim Americans participants. So this results actually is very similar to other findings. There are not that much research about this topic since it's a relatively new issue. But Abu-Ras and their colleagues actually their study revealed similar results. So although Muslims in the United States have been increasingly exposed to discrimination based on their Muslim identity, the level of self-reported perceived discrimination was relatively low, in the Likert scale, even in the Trump era. Yet more than half of the participants reported experiencing anti-Muslim discrimination incident during the Trump era, but they still didn't perceive that much high perceived discrimination, although it was significant compared to before and after the Trump era. So this phenomenon may be explained by several factors. This finding, it was evidence, since it is argued that cultural fluency, and the first one is culture. The first explanation was cultural integration. So, since it is argued that cultural fluency has a significant role in individuals' perception of discrimination, such as understanding microaggressions may require higher level of proficiency in language, it can be claimed that participants' cultural integration might be relatively low, mine actually samples. And the second explanation might be alternative explanation to this mismatch might be explained by spirituality or religious commitment, among Muslim Americans. They may have been practicing the Islamic principle of forgive the forgiven, forgive to be forgiven, by underreporting those events. So the second one would be for the another explanation actually for this discrepancy between this discrimination they were exposed to and the discrimination they perceive could be connected to internalized oppression. Or the ways the racism and oppression are internalized by its target due to its prevalence and the severity. So when we come to like, concluding some clinical implications. So what does this study say to us, and how we could just adapt those results to like clinical field? So clinicians actually should know the importance of providing culturally sensitive services, and they shouldn't just assume their formal education or training has prepared them to work effectively with this unique marginalized group. And they diligently like should address these three components, like according to the theoretical framework that I have used, like historical trauma, national context, and societal and institutional discrimination at the group and individual level uh, therapeutical services. So building trust is essential when working with this population. So the clinician should definitely continually educate themselves. So they also should be aware of the complexities of their Muslim American clients, oppression and discrimination experiences. For example, like clinicians like should increase awareness of the consequences of current government policies that may impact the clients or their family and loved ones. Like, for example, like Muslim ban or some kind of, like visa ban, like a working visa ban. So, like, if they are, if those actually, I'm talking about like more institutional like discrimination, if those are impacting not directly to the client, but clients actually, relatives or parents or like spouses or partners. So they should be really aware of and the impact of those, situation and discrimination, like based on their clients. And clinicians should definitely consider and assess the barriers that prevent their potential Muslim American clients from seeking mental health services. For example, if a Muslim client in a college counseling center like express uh, like any concerns about like being audio tape being recorded, so adjustments actually should be made to accommodate this client rather than denying services due to their concern. And clinician needs to understand intersectionality of Muslim clients and avoid making assumptions about their Muslim identity based on their knowledge about Islam, and empower them to explore their identity. So, therefore, clinicians also need to consider roles of overt and covert racism, sexism, microaggression among Muslim Americans, and address issues of belonging and alienation not only within the US society but also within Muslim community. So since Muslim Americans are a racially and ethnically like highly diverse group, so racism, colorism, and nationalism still exist among this group. For example, like Hispanic Muslim perceived like higher level of group discrimination than other Muslims, according to research, and Muslim women are less likely than Muslim men to report discrimination. So the clinician should be aware of those nuances and differences. And clinician also should keep in mind that their Muslim clients might not recognize internalized oppression they experience due to their Muslim identity and engage with self-blaming attitudes and belief. So it is clinicians' responsibility to highlight those institutional and societal oppression when it is appropriate. But in order to be able to like address and actually like highlight those, like clinicians should be informed from the first hand. So like continuing education, continuing training, and also I think is are really like essential in order to provide like culturally sensitive services for this community, especially like under this politically challenging times and difficult times, like in the Muslim American society in the United States. So those are the references, and this is the end of my presentation. So thank you for attending and thank you for listening. So I would like to I would be happy to answer any questions if you have any. So thank you so much for the opportunity that was given to us to present online. And I hope and I wish actually you will enjoy uh, the conference as much as I do. Have a nice day. Thank you.